Hello, this is Benjamin Ryder from the Academy of Gaming, Film and Animation at Northern Adelaide Senior College, and today what we're looking at is the level sequencer. So this is for our Stage 1 students. We're at the final part of the game asset assignment, so that's Specialised Skill Task 3. So far what you've done is you've 3D modelled and UV unwrapped this chest. You've rigged and animated it inside of Maya and brought it into the level, and now you've got it so that when the character walks up to that, a widget comes up, you press a button and it opens, you press a button and it closes. So if you're that far in it, you've pretty much done the assignment, but we've added this extra part here where we can look at the level sequencer and how to use the level sequencer, how to keyframe the camera movements, and then also how to have that play when you're either start of the level or when you're opening up the chest. Okay, so to give you an example of what the level sequencer is, in order to get to it, you normally go here and go add master sequence. Level sequence will just give you one camera, and the problem with working with one camera is that your camera will have to move. So if you're doing a circle around here and then you want it to cut to being inside the chest, unfortunately, depending on the frame rates, you will see it move. So it's good for, like, say, a one shot, like you're going like 1917 sort of style and everything, but if you're looking for those really hard cuts, then you're better off using this master sequence down here. And you really want to have a bit of an idea about what you want to do before you get started. Experiment with it first and then sort of come back at it with a storyboard or an idea of what shots and how many shots you want. So to give you an idea of what this looks like, you can see here I've already got one. So when you click on it and you decide how many shots, you'll get something like this. And as you can see, as I move this, we start to see this camera appear. So I've said 3 shots, so it's given me these 3 shots. And what it means by that is it's created 3 different cameras. So if I want to edit these cameras, their movement, their focal length, anything about them, I have to double click on this to get into that camera, select the camera in there, and then do all the keyframing and movement in there like this. And as soon as I go out, you'll see that that camera disappears because it no longer exists. It only exists on that timeline. And then when I click on this next timeline, I can see that another camera has appeared. So that's how it does that hard cut. It has multiple cameras that are spawned in and then spawned out. Think of it like players in a video game where you take possession of different players. That's exactly what's happening here. So then I've got this shot that moves around. And then finally, I have this top-down shot here that just comes down onto the actual sort of crate. And as you can see, as soon as I move out of that, I'm no longer piloting that camera, but I do have this weird orthographically viewed camera. And I mean orthographics, it doesn't have the same depth of field that I would normally have from something if it wasn't the level sequencer and everything. My actual camera is kind of gone because it's changed the camera settings to what was in the last sort of thing in there. So just to go back from scratch, so you can see my normal camera has come back now. I'm going to go through and set this all up. So I go here, I go add master sequence, and I want the number of shots, and I really need to figure that out first. So I'm going to go with 3 because I don't expect people to do any more than that. I can go down here and change any of these numbers, but this is for more when you start sort of, I guess, exporting it out or getting it into actual projects. For now, the only thing you really need to change is this. I'm going to go create sequence. It's going to say you already have a level sequence in here because I already had one before. So if I replace it, the other one will be deleted. I'm going to say yes, and I'm just going to go, yep, so that's fine. So level 1, okay. So the reason it's not going to do that is because I've already got it attached to the opening level blueprint or somewhere in the blueprint that's not allowing me to then actually create a new sequence. So I'm just going to go into there and just delete it. So now I'm going to go in here, it's no longer showing up, go add master sequence, go 3, create, yes, please create. And I think the reason it's saying that is because it's referenced by another image, so it's actually still reading the other one even though it doesn't exist. And so I'm just going to try it on a different map here. This will also have 11 sequence in it, of course it does. So I'm going to have to find one that doesn't. And it will still have that in there because level sequence, game sequence, master sequence, master sequence. So unfortunately the reason is because we have a level sequencer that's already in there it's not allowing us to create another one that is already in there, even if I've got rid of that one from here. So just be aware of that when you're starting up this one and everything else like that, that if you already have one and it's referenced somewhere, that it can be that issue there. So I think what we're gonna have to do is go back to my original and see where that is actually triggered. It's not in this one because that's just playing the animation there, and it's not in the startup for this one because it is not in there, which means here we are. If we get rid of that now, hopefully that means I can now just create my master sequence. It's not going to let me do it. No, here we go. Excellent. So sorry about that detour. That will require editing later. But this just gives us our sequence. And as we can see, we've just got our 3 sequences here. They're not doing anything. They've just spawned those 3 cameras in. If I zoom out, I can see, yep, there's one camera, there's the other one, and there's the third one. So to change this, I'm going to double click on this. Now there's 2 ways I can go about doing this. I can either do it from the director's chair. That means I can move this and I can see my little picture in picture here, and I can then edit it that way. Or I can actually click on the cinema, go right click on it and go pilot. And now any movements I do, I can keyframe in here as well. So let's just do it with the pilot one first, and then I'll show you the other one. What you'll need to know about the pilot is this only exists within this timeline. As soon as I go out, you'll see it does that little jump, and now I've exited out of that camera. So when you're doing that piloting camera, you got to make sure that you're inside the timeline. So this is again where it's going to be a little bit different for people who haven't done too much in the way of editing in 3D, because we don't just have these cuts or trims or anything else like that. We have these keyframes here. Now in Maya, when you'll keyframe it, you just pressed S and that created keyframes. But in here, to be able to keyframe anything, we need to first find what we need to keyframe. In this case, the transform, because that takes care of its location, rotation, and scale. And then the other parts here we can also keyframe are the aperture and focal length. So we may not have got to it yet in Studio Binder, but we will start looking at focus pulling and those sort of focus shots and everything. And what those focus shots are is, if I sort of have it in here, you can see that this is completely out of focus. It's all blurry. But if I go here to my focal length, I can either make it super blurry or sharpen it up like that. So this is under manual focus. So when you get your shot here, you're probably going to want to get it into sharp focus. Now I was explaining this before, because we have a really low aperture and it's letting in a lot of light, the background now becomes really, really sort of blurry. And so if you don't want that, you can actually start increasing the focal length to get that sort of deeper sort of depth of field of focus there. And you can also sort of change the focal length here to get the width of the camera. So to put it into perspective, this, if your camera is blurry, play with this till you get it so it's not blurry and sharp. If you're noticing that the background is either too sharp or not blurry enough, you want to play with the aperture settings. And then with the focal length, that's how you're changing like how wide your camera shot is here. So a really low focal current focal length is going to give you that really big wide angle lens shot that you're going to see later on when we start looking more at Studio Binder, and a larger sort of focal length is going to give us that really sharp flat sort of look that you see in a lot of Wes Anderson sort of films and everything, where everything looks very flat. So those are the settings that you can play with, and you can actually keyframe them in. So for example, if I wanted, in this first setting, I walk up to the sort of camera here, and then I go here and here, and I decide, you know what, I want to have this blurry like that. I can actually click on this little button here that adds a keyframe to that setting, and then move it across to 30, because we're at 30 frames per second, which means this is 1 second. And then I can put it back into focus again, like so. And as you can see, it automatically keyframes it for me. So I can always, if I don't want it to keyframe there, I can move that further along, so it takes longer for it to come into focus.
How exactly do I pilot
the camera? So again, to pilot the camera, you just right click on the camera when you're inside the timeline. Now this is really important. When I'm outside the timeline here, I'm not piloting the camera anymore. If I pull it back onto the timeline, it's going to treat the camera as a separate object. But if I want to pilot the camera, I first check to make sure I'm on the timeline, right click on the object or in the outliner, and click pilot camera. And then I move it within this timeline here. So if I don't want this one here, I just want it to stay in focus, I can right click on it and delete that key just there and everything. So let's say I just want to be able to make a rotation around this point. I just want to move this camera so it rotates around this sort of part here. I know my character is going to be in front of the chest, so I want to kind of consider like them being in frame. So I start here and I go down to transform and I click here. That transforms my location, my rotation, and my scale. And now I'm going to click on there, press F to focus in on it, and I'm going to rotate to around this point here. So I'm going to rotate around to here, and as I pull this along the timeline, you notice it snaps back because I've got that keyframe there. So best practices is to move this along the timeline first, then move your camera into position, and then keyframe like so. And as you see, there's now a line connecting those two, and that's representing the animation. Now you'll notice, and I'm going to actually jump out of the camera here so we can watch the camera moving now. If I bring this in, you'll notice that even though I've kind of gone in an arc, the camera has decided to go into a straight line here. And that's because when you're keyframing things like this, they will always find the fastest possible way to get there. Now I didn't do the one thing that I was expecting it to do, which is flip over, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's say I wanted to create more of an arc here. I could get to that middle point, bring it back to here, and then keyframe that point there. And now we'll see that line forms that arc there. So when we get to principles of animation, we'll talk about arcs and why they're a little bit more pleasing. But generally speaking, with cameras, they always are just a little bit more pleasing if they happen in an arc like that. So that's the way you can do that. You can then sort of pull this out and then re-keyframe it if you wanted to. So I could have it, further out like that and then keyframe it. I could just, if I didn't want it, I wanted to go straight back to what it was, I could just do that and then just keep it there and everything. I might decide I want to lower it down here, in which case I just click that again, and again, it just sort of goes down and gives that small arc and bow there. So that's just your simple sort of sequence there. So we just got that moving around there. I might decide, you know what, this is happening too quickly, so I'm going to move this across to here, and I'm going to move these across to this middle point here and everything. And so now, when I press play down here and look at my picture-in-picture, I can see it just taking place and just moving along like that. Now, the reason we use the master sequence is because now I can click back on this master sequence, can go through that motion, and then do a hard cut. So if you're coming from DaVinci Resolve again, you're probably used to having that sort of razor slice tool and everything to be able to cut your sort of bits of film up like they used to do in the old days. Well, we don't do that here. Here we just kind of have to recreate a camera. So this is now the active camera and it's spawning in there and everything. So we've already had one that's going around as an arc and everything. Another one that comes up in the shot guide is a point of view shot. So that's like a sort of inside the sort of chest and everything. We'll do that last. I actually just want to have this do a sort of reaction shot, I guess. So looking at the character when the chest opens up. So I'm actually going to, for this purposes, bring in my third person character into here, just as a bit of a guide to what's there and everything. I'm not going to go back to level sequencer. If this disappears for whatever reason, you can just get this back up here, click there, and it should appear there. So now I can actually see, if I click here and click there and everything, I can now actually see, okay, how does this frame the person? So for example, I might look at that and be like, no, I don't like how it cuts this person's head off at that shot. I'm going to change that. So just having mannequin in there is a good way of doing that. But I want the next shot to be a reaction shot, so I'm going to go to this one here, I'm going to zoom out, it's right there. So I'm actually going to do a bit of the manual way. So instead of piloting it, I'm just going to do it from the director's chair. So one of the things that's important to notice is that this is using world axes, and that can sometimes flip the camera around. So I'm actually going to use, the world vertices to get it into position first, and then I'm going to, when I rotate it, because here if I can get something in the horizon line, if I rotate it down, see how it's all tilted and wrong? Like we don't want that. And that's because we're using the world axes instead of the actual object axes. With the object axes, it follows the camera. So now when I pull it up, that horizon line is straight. So just something to consider there. I'm going to get that into a flat position there, and then I'm going to go back to world so I can actually get this here, and then I'm going to rotate it around so it's facing on the character there. And basically what I want is I want the sort of reaction shot from the character when they look inside the chest. Now, the problem with that is I can't tell if the lid is going to obscure my view. So I'm going to click on my little chest, and I'm going to go Edit Chest, go to my skeletal mesh, and just for now, and this is going to look a bit weird because the outline one here isn't going to follow, but just for here, I'm going to go and instead of animation blueprint, go animation asset. I'm going to go to chest open, and then I'm going to go to my viewport. And instead of have it looping or playing, I'm just going to get initial position and then open it up like that. I'm also going to do the same for that one. In fact, I'm actually going to copy that and then do the same for this one here. So this is an outline that I had around, which is just a means to an end. It looks a bit like something out of Peter Pan at the moment, where his shadow is just there. But we just want that chest at its open position there, just so we've got that. So I'm now going to go down here, have a look here, and it looks like for whatever reason that wasn't keyframed to position. So I'm just going to fix that now by going into here, putting it at the start, and then moving it over again. Now that I've got that chest at the open position, I can go into Object, rotate my camera flat, rotate my camera around, and as I can see here, I can't see the chest, so I need to get that lower to the ground. So I could do a Dutch angle here. I could just sort of like rotate it up like so. But again, the biggest problem here isn't the positioning necessarily of the camera or the chest, it's the focal the focal length here at 35. It's just too narrow a frame of field. So I'm actually just going to open this up a bit like that. And then even if I just cut to this and just had that chest opening up, that would be a really cool sort of shot and everything like that. But as it is, I'm just going to add a bit of movement to it, just so it kind of looks a little bit more specky, and so I can show how you would use this sort of movement. So I'm going to keyframe that here, transform, and then move it across to the end. Then there, and then just keyframe that. And that's just going to give a subtle sort of tracking movement to it, just to keep it there. Could do anything with that shot, but it's the next shot that I sort of want to sort of have there and everything. And that is this one here, where I want to have it actually inside the camera, looking up at the person. So go into here, and I grab my camera again. Again, I go to World when I'm moving, and Object when I'm rotating. So I move that in here, move that in here, go to Object, rotate, move down, rotate. You can see it's a little bit off kilter there, so I'm just going to move that there. And as we can see, we've got the same problem that we had before, where it's on a 35mm and that's just not big enough. So we're going to actually make that a little bit wider and rotate it up a bit. Go to our world axes, move it down a bit. Okay, so that's a little bit too wide, really. Oops. It's focal length. I'm going to switch off the snap for the move here and everything, so I can get a better shot. And then out like that. Cool. So that's just going to happen just there. Now, quick problem. I've got the reaction shot here for this camera, but I then have the camera inside the shot here for the opening. And I don't actually want that in that order. I want the camera to be inside the chest when it opens, and I want the reaction shot afterwards. So to move that, I just simply move this one down, move this one across, and then move this one in like this. Just like you would in a traditional video editing software. If you've used that before, then you know what that looks and feels like. Okay, so I can also shorten this a little bit if I wanted to, but I'd go into there first and sort of see what it looks like there to sort of see how it looks. I'm actually just going to play it now and actually just get a feel for it. Before I do that, I'm going to switch my chest back to its animation blueprint, and to its animation blueprint, so it uses that blueprint here. And now we're on to actually playing the animation, because just because we've got it, it's a bit like the widget. It won't actually appear until we actually connect it and say, use this widget. So after we press E, and we've got the widget sort of created and everything, and we've gone on to play our animation, I'm now going to come out of here and say, master sequence, create level sequence player. So just like the widget, you have to create it, which is like spawning it in. We then select it from this list. As you can see, we have all these other shots from all my other things, but we want to go with sequence master. We then want to come out of return value, just like we would with the widget when we attach to the viewport, except we're just going to pull it out here and say play like that. So now we're going to give it a shot. When we walk up and we press E, it should play this level sequence, and we'll have a look at how it looks. Okay, so I've already got someone else in there as an imposter, so that's a good start. I walk up, and now when I press E, straight away, my sequencer plays. So we've got that typical shot from the inside there from point of view, and then we've got a reaction shot as well. It's a bit out of focus though, as you can see, so I'd have to fix that. So, a couple of things there. First of all, the chest opens up way too quickly, so we could just go back to our sequence here, and we're just going to put a delay on playing this animation, which means we pull this down, play this level sequence first, and then delay. Going to delay it by 2 seconds, and then put completed into play animation sequence. So now when we play it, I walk up, press E, the animation waits, hold 2 seconds before it opens up. That's still not long enough for me to see my opening up shot here. So I'm actually going to go back into this and see, okay, yep, this is 30 frames per second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 5 seconds we've got to wait for this to actually work. So I go back. So again, I could just change the level sequence, make it quicker, or I could just change this to 5. So this is going between, again, taking the people who know a little bit more about game engines and game editing and programming with that. This will be your wheelhouse, whereas the people who are coming from a movie background, this will be more of your sort of wheelhouse and everything. So it's combining those two skills together, and you can lean on whichever one is your strength. So if your strength is this, then go into the blueprint. Otherwise, you could just go into the video editor and say, well, let's just make this shot shorter then, so it doesn't have to wait as long. But we're already committed, so let's just go. So it waits. Yep, so we can see that we're a little bit too far behind with that, so we'd have to move the camera closer because it's not actually in the chest, it's kind of sitting outside the chest, but you get the idea. So when it comes to what you need to do for your assignment, as long as you've got it playing here, you could have it playing at the start of the level as well if you wanted to do an introductory sequence. So if you're doing an opening sequence, you might go open level blueprint, and as soon as we get to event begin play, you can just go create level sequence player, play, and now when I play the level, it should open up and do that, but it didn't for whatever reason. Runtime error access none, creative, okay, because that's, yep. So in here, you've got to make sure you select that level sequence. So now, as soon as the level starts, no matter where I spawn, that animation plays. So that's 2 ways you can have it. I don't mind which way. As long as you've got a minimum of 3 shots that happen as it's rotating through, I don't mind if it's like one way or the other. So as you can see, this one doesn't work as well because obviously I'm dependent on that animation and timing that up. So consider that as well. But that's all I really wanted to show, was a very basic way of being able to use this level sequencer, because it's not as intuitive as you would think. But once you get the hang of it, you can do some really amazing stuff. And I'm hoping that as you sort of learn more about the sort of shot guide and you start thinking a bit more, that as well as actually looking at other films, you'll start actually experimenting with this one as well. Because not everyone has a camera that's going to have these kinds of focal length things to be able to change. So being able to have that at your fingertips inside of a virtual property is a really good thing to do. So anyway, have fun with that. If you can do that for the last part of the PowerPoint for the sequencer, that'll be great. Otherwise, continue on with your English and start getting some of those examples from films. I look forward to having more chats with you in class. If you have any questions about this or the English assignment, please just give me a shout. Thank you.